I am John Graham, your host, and we are again here at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am joined today by Saundra Dalton-Smith, MD. I know I'm going to make sure I say that because you earned it. And she has a book called Sacred Rest. I'll go ahead and show that cover. Sacred Rest. You know, on the seventh day, God said to rest, and we have ignored him ever since. So, Saundra, tell me about this book. Why'd you bring this book about? Why was this important?
Well, I'm an internal medicine physician, and about 10 years into my clinical practice, I got to a place where I burned out. And, you know, it's one of those situations where, as a physician, I thought, okay, traditional medicine should have some answers to someone who's chronically fatigued and feeling tired all the time. Well, their only answer was to get more sleep. And so I started trying to be more proactive with the sleeping, getting 8 hours. But what I found was that there are types of fatigue that have nothing to do with just being physically exhausted. And so that God really just took me on a journey of evaluating what does it really mean to rest when he says, come to us all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I think many of us put limitations on that, and we think that he's going to give us peace only, he's going to give us sleep. But what I found as I was working through the scriptures and through the science is that there are actually 7 different types of rest. And as I started applying that, I really saw some changes.
So I need to hear about these 7 kinds of rest. So one is obviously physical.
Absolutely.
I'm sleepy or I'm physically tired. But, I mean, we can get our head wrapped around that. But tell me about the other 6.
Yeah, well, even with the physical has 2 components. It has the passive component, which is the sleeping and the napping, and then it has an active component, which includes things like stretching or doing a leisure walk, where you're just improving the circulation, the lymphatics, the muscle integrity. And then the other 6 include things like mental, spiritual, social, emotional, sensory, and creative types of rest.
Okay, let's walk through those. Now, I'm drawn to creative, so tell me about creative.
I can imagine you'd be drawn to creative. Well, creative rest is the rest we experience when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty and let it, kind of that childlike awe and wonder, that awakening that happens inside of us. A lot of people experience it around bodies of water. They can't quantify what it is, but being at the ocean, looking at the wave, something about that just makes them feel restored. Yeah. And really at the core of rest is that need for restoration. It's kind of pouring back into the places that we pour out of. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't think of themselves as creatives because they're not creating music or art, or, you know, they're not writing or something like that. But really, creative energy is used every time you have to solve a problem. Whenever you're being innovative, you're using creative energy. And over these past 2 years with the pandemic, people were having to do everything they'd done one way completely different.
Right.
So there was a lot of innovation that we were doing in our own homes. Just how do you get groceries?
Yep.
You know, became an innovative process. And so we had a lot of people who were creatively depleted and couldn't understand why they were so exhausted when they were working from home.
So, okay, for me, it's not the beach. I'm one of those unicorns. It's the mountains.
Yes.
So my family, we actually own some property in the middle of nowhere up in Murphy, North Carolina. Across our little road is this incredible waterfall, and I just go sit there and listen to that, and nothing else matters. It's remarkable. So I'm with you on that. Tell me about sensory rest.
Sensory rest is one that affects a lot of us, and we're not aware of it. We're not cognitively aware of how it's affecting us. It's really taking a look at the sensory inputs in our day, the lights, the sounds, are their phones ringing in the background, or their kids in the other room laughing while you're trying to work on your, do your work from home. What are the things that in your sensory areas are being depleted, and are you spending some time in silence? Are you spending some time downgrading maybe the lights on your computer before bedtime? Not necessarily having to get off the computer for 4 hours before, which was what the old research showed, but actually looking at just dimming the brightness of the computer screen begins to help to deplete some of that. Taking some time to think about how we engage with even things like video conferencing. A lot of people talked about Zoom fatigue, not to badmouth one company. Is video conferencing in general, really, but that's the name a lot of people gave it. But they were actually sensing is that they were being sensory overwhelmed. Every one of those little boxes was its own sensory input, unlike being in a meeting where everybody's consuming the same sensory input.
Right. I find myself at the end of the day, or typically late afternoon, I have been in front of my computer. I have been receiving emails, Facebook messages, my text messages, my watch is buzzing, and at the end of the day, I find myself just wanting to scream. Take all of that technology and throw it in the trash and just go away somewhere.
That's a great point, because that's actually the reaction. When people become sensory overwhelmed, they respond with irritation, agitation, rage, or anger. And so you can see how, even within 2020, when we went to completely remote and virtual, there was like just this bad universal feeling where everybody just was so on edge. And so that's what you need to be aware of, because one of the things you mentioned was so important. The number of notifications that people experience within a day is overwhelming for most of us, from our social media apps to the text messaging, and every little buzz sets off that cortisol response, and over time it can really get you to a place where you feel just drained.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about physical, sensory,
and creative.
We've got emotional, spiritual, and a couple more left.
Social and mental.
So let's talk about spiritual.
Spiritual rest. Most people, when they hear that, they automatically are thinking I'm telling them to do more devotions. Devotions are needed. Scripture reading is needed.
Right.
But really, at the core, spiritual rest is the intimacy. It's that building relationship. It's time in God's presence. It's really just kind of making sure that you are familiar with the person of the Word and not just the Word. And so that's kind of the differentiation there, just kind of making sure, because sometimes I'm a Bible teacher within my church, and so digging in the Word to try to get my plan together, and I have to make sure that I stay in communion with God.
Yeah, and that actually, I would imagine, really dovetails into the sensory part. I mean, it's hard to have an intimate relationship with God when your watch is telling you to pay attention to it.
That's so true.
It's crazy. As soon as I said that, my watch literally just buzzed. So there it is in the text. But I get it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So spiritual is about intimacy, not necessarily about finding that great nugget that you can share with somebody and make yourself feel like you've uncovered some treasure. Just having a relationship with God.
Exactly. And reading the Word is a part of it. That is a part of the intimacy. But we just have to make sure that we're kind of staying connected with it and not just turning it into an academic book that we're learning from.
So emotional rest.
Emotional, yes, that one is something that I think all of us probably could need more assistance with over time, because it really requires us to be able to share our feelings with people and to have that level of vulnerability. And it requires first identifying who are the people in your life that you feel comfortable doing that are safe places. It's not healthy to share your deepest emotions with everybody. That's not a good thing. You're going to probably get hurt in that process. But there should be some people in your life. I mean, it could be a therapist or a counselor, a pastor, a trusted friend. There should be somebody where if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling suicidal, you should have someone that you can share that with, because trying to hold all of that in creates a lot of emotional labor. And over these past few years, a lot of people have been holding on to a lot of emotional labor. Families, people lost jobs, people had, all type of issues that happened because they didn't want their kids to worry about how we're going to eat or how we're going to pay for the mortgage or whatever it is. And so there has to be somebody in your life where you can just tell it like it is and you can say how you're feeling and get that off of your chest.
In our culture has kind of either overtly or covertly said, push through, drive through, keep grinding, that's where success is. Just keep pushing. And no, that's not what God intends at all.
It is not. That's what the world has created, a burnout culture where everybody's angry, nobody can smile, nobody can be nice. It's one of those situations where everybody is so overwhelmed and taxed that they can't really enjoy their life anymore. It's all about the grind, and that is not God's best.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we on our list?
I think we're all the way to mental
rest.
Yes.
Wow. So let's talk about it.
Mental rest is clearing out your mental space, is really getting to that peace and calm in the mind. A lot of people have mental rest deficits. They lay down at night, their mind's racing, they can't get it to shut up.
Yeah.
They're thinking of all the things, the conversations they had the night before. They're thinking about, what are they going to do the next day? They're already planning out the next day, and nowhere near. People are having trouble remembering things as a part of mental rest deficits. Walk into a store, can't remember 3 items. They're 25, they don't have dementia. So it's one of those things where we really have to learn how to focus our attention, and a big part of that is also learning how to clear the mind. So for example, if you lay down at night and it's like you're thinking of something, or some of us, you have those moments where you feel like you get this great inspiration in the middle of the night and you refuse to just jot it down, you're going to just try to forget about it. You won't forget about it. Your brain will hold on to that bit of information at the expense of you sleeping, because it's like, if I don't hold on to it, we're going to lose it. So a simple process is what we call brain dumping or mind dumping. Just have a notepad, a Post-it note, something where you just jot down whatever that information is. As soon as you jot it down, it gives the brain permission to release it, because it's no longer responsible for holding on to that bit of information.
That's a great word. Okay, so, and the Bible talks about meditation.
It does.
Is that part of mental rest? And
absolutely.
Christians, evangelicals get weirded out about this idea, thinking we're talking about some Eastern mysticism, but it's a biblical principle.
Absolutely, it is. And the way I teach people how to meditate, as they say, is think on a characteristic of God. What are those things that are noble? What are those things that are worthy to be thinking about? And rather than worry is a form of negative meditation.
Wow.
And people are doing it all around the world who are God-believing people. And so if you can think about the negative things and meditate on those, which is basically a ruminating thought. That's what meditation is.
Yeah.
Have the ruminating thoughts be things that are of God. So I always say, whatever it is that you're worrying about, if you're worrying about your kids or you're worrying about your bills or whatever it is, what is a characteristic of who God is that you can focus on instead? So I'm a mama, and so I have a child that's going off to college this year, and that's a whole different experience. And so I will get through it, thank you. And so whenever I have one of those moments where I'm starting to slip into worry, I automatically think, God, you are his protector. He was your child first. That is the things that I meditate on. And I keep saying that to myself whenever the negative thought comes. I redirect it to what I know to be true. God is a deliverer. God is a redeemer. He's there with him in the process, and I just keep repeating
that's a discipline.
It is.
It does not come easy. It's not natural. Am I right in saying? Right.
But if you start trying to think positive thoughts, you're going to have some resistance there naturally, and so you have to overcome the resistance of those of thinking of those kind of thoughts that are the things you want to think of, the things you know to be true in the Word of God. And sometimes that can be a scripture. But for some people, if you're really struggling with clearing your mind, just having one word. Sometimes I just meditate on the word peace. The thought comes up, the worry, I just say peace. Psalm 91. I don't even repeat the scripture. I know what the psalm says.
Yep.
And so I just say that, in my head to remind me of that is what's true, not whatever it is my head's trying to tell me.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like there's one we've missed.
So it's physical, mental,
check.
Spiritual,
right.
Emotional, social.
Social, there
That's
it is.
the one.
Yeah.
So social is really identifying the people in your life all the people in your life are either positively or negatively pulling from your social energy. Honestly, the people who you love most are negatively pulling from your social energy.
And withdrawing from you.
Yes,
yeah.
They need you. They need things from you. So your kids, your spouse, your elderly parents, your co-workers, whoever you're pouring into, they're negatively pulling from your social energy. So then you have to be aware, who are the people who are positively pouring back into you? Who are the life-giving people in your life? I see this a lot with people who are within ministry. Pastors get burned out. Doctors, nurses, that's kind of the groups that I tend to be around, get easily burned out because they have a heart to pour. And they have no issue with people pulling from them, but then oftentimes they are not very accustomed to being poured back into.
Yeah.
And so that's something that also has to be learned to some degree. You have to learn how to receive from that aspect of it. And the beautiful part of it is your spouse and your kids, yes, they negatively pull from you, but in a healthy relationship, there should be times that they're pouring back as well.
So You know, I find myself in that boat so often because I've been in ministry my whole life. I've had, my job is to help people all the time, right? As is yours. And so sometimes I get to the end of a season of time, let's say a week, I don't know. And I tell my wife, I feel like everybody wants a piece of me. I gotta have somebody, that's really what I'm communicating.
Exactly.
I'm socially exhausted.
That's exactly right. And I love just looking at the life of Jesus. In the book Sacred Rest, I divided it up into two sections. The first half of the book is the science, the research, the practical application of the word. The second half is all spiritual. I started off talking about the life of Jesus and how he kind of puts some of this into practice in ways. And we see so many times where he pulls away from the crowd. I mean, those people were still sick. There were still people who needed things from him.
It's an endless list.
Yeah, but it's like, and even at certain examples where you hear him say, "Who touched me?" It's like people are pulling things out of us, and we have to be able to understand there's nothing wrong with recognizing that. You have to recognize it, otherwise you continue to get depleted.
So over the past 2-3 years, 2.5 years, the world has been completely bonkers, upside down. We've talked about how all the technology has reoriented so many things and made us exhausted. What about trauma? So many people have lost people that we all know somebody that has died from COVID. How does that, I'm assuming that multiplies our need for rest.
It does. Trauma, grief, all of those things change and adapt kind of the types of rest we need. Because you mentioned you love the mountains, I love the ocean. It's individualized.
Sure.
Each of us have different ways that we experience rest in every one of the 7 different types. And one of the things that we created with the book was a free assessment at restquiz.com, because one of the number one things people kept saying is, how do I know which of these 7 I need? Right. Because you're getting some of them naturally just because to survive. But oftentimes, if there's 1 or 2 that you haven't thought about, you may be severely depleted in that particular type of rest. So the quiz was to help people kind of identify that. And one of the big ones that we find is with trauma, the area that people tend to have a rest deficit in is the emotional rest deficit. And that in part because rather than getting emotional rest, what they do is they trauma dump. They don't talk about the feelings, which is where the healing occur. They talk about the actual event. They tell them about what the lights and the sounds were, and all of these kind of graphic details, so that you get a mental movie in your head, which is a form of trauma dumping. You've basically invited the other person into the trauma with you. Where the healing occurs is when we actually discuss how that made us feel.
Yeah.
That's much more vulnerable. So people tend to resist that, but that is actually what's needed.
So I expect this is an impossible question to answer, but we'll give it a shot. How long does it take to feel rest?
Well, that's an interesting question because it depends on how depleted you are. When I started this journey, I literally opened the book up with me flat on my back on the floor. So it took me a long time, years of research, years of putting this in practice in my own life, putting it in practice in my, with my patients. But what I find is, no matter how depleted you are, you start feeling better the moment you start pouring back into one of the areas.
Yeah.
Because I oftentimes think about each of these as little buckets, and we're all pouring out of the buckets. Some buckets are more depleted than other buckets. But if you start getting one level improved, you feel the kind of the momentum of that improvement, and oftentimes that actually helps you to then work on the other ones that need to be treated as well.
I wonder if there's a picture of what it looks like to be completely, your tank full in all 7 categories. What does that look like?
I call it living from the overflow.
Okay.
Because I think that's kind of where we all want to get to. When you're burned out, you're not getting much accomplished. When you're on fire, you're almost like that burning bush. You're a sign and a wonder to the world, because they're like, how can they do all of this stuff and not be consumed by by all the energy that they're putting out? And I think that's kind of where we all want to kind of adhere to that place where we're doing what God's given us to do. We're doing it with passion. We're doing it with energy. We can keep a smile on our face, be nice to people.
I wonder, there are people that seem to, maybe they just bounce from one trauma to the next, or one unbelievably depleting experience to the next, and they kind of create these fake ways to get through. Maybe it's pharmaceuticals, or maybe it's illegal drugs or alcohol or whatever. These are all ways, honestly, I would expect that tie into our lack of rest. Would you agree?
I do. I feel like the coffee consumption. Now, coffee it's nice. People can drink it, no problem. But if you wake up and you feel like you can't even start your day without having a caffeine fix, there's something there. Why do you need that extra energy boost?
Right.
If you can't go to sleep without having to take a bunch of pills, and there's nothing medically wrong, there's medical reasons that you have to do certain things. But if it's just that I can't get my brain to turn off, so I'm going to medically kind of induce myself into sleep, I don't have a problem with sleeping pills for a season.
Sure.
There are times that they are needed. Right after a death of someone that was very close to you, it could be very hard to get your emotions under control.
Right.
Sometimes medicines are needed for that, but those should be the exception, not the rule.
Not something you want to do the rest of your life.
No. So I think it's really important to understand that rest is really the bridge to better sleep. We can't treat sleep like our lights in our home, where you flick a switch and you just flip your body and brain off and go to bed. There has to be kind of a settling down of yourself so that you can ease into high quality sleep. And I feel like rest is really that bridge that a lot of people are missing.
Well, Saundra, this is a fascinating book, and I've just enjoyed so much talking to you about it. I want to encourage everybody to get a copy. I guarantee there are people watching this that need it, personally, present company included. So, Sacred Rest, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith out of Birmingham. And where can folks find the book?
The book is available in most Christian bookstores, as well as in Amazon, and on my website at ichoosemybestlife.com.
All right. And I want to make sure folks got that quiz. Where is that available?
It's very simple, restquiz.com.
That's easy to remember, restquiz.com. Go take the quiz. You're going to fail, okay? Go take the quiz and then get a copy of Sacred Rest. Saundra, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Until next time,